Hello everyone and welcome to the night before news for GCSE Psychology Paper 1. In this PowerPoint I will be going through the different topics that you'll be covering, a bit of the information in each one and the exam technique you will need for all different types of questions. On each slide you'll see an audio symbol. Please click on this and you'll be able to hear me talk through the information. Also you can then pause this and listen back to it as many times as you would like. Please remember, if there's anything you're not sure, if you've also got the revision PowerPoint to check your knowledge against, and that can really help you understand the overview that I will be giving you as we go through this PowerPoint. Please click on to the next slide, and then I'll be going through the topics that will be coming up and the order they'll be appearing in.
Within paper 1, there are file and relief topics. Each of these topics are worth 16 marks each, and the order there on your screen are the order they appear in the paper. So it goes development, memory, psychological problems, brain and neuropsychology, and then social influence. In the 16 marks, these are made up of 1 and 2 mark questions. Occasionally you'll get a question that looks like it's 4 marks, but it will be asking for 1 strength and 1 weakness, so it's a combination of two 2-mark answers. There will be knowledge-based questions, there will be trigger questions, and remember within these sections there are also those no knowledge questions, so asking for conclusions, and some of those new studies where you have to evaluate them. So you need to make sure you focus on whether it needs knowledge or if it is a no knowledge question throughout. At the end of your paper, you'll see there will be 2 9-mark questions. One of the questions will be on the issues and debates. Remember, each topic has 1 issue and debate, and we'll go through these as we go through the course. But it is moral development for development, it is reduction and holism for memory, it is nature versus nurture for psychological problems, it's psychology over time for brain and neuropsychology, and it's social cultural issues for social influence. So one of those will have a 9-mark question based on it. The second 9-mark question gives you a scenario and asks you to pick 2 areas of psychology to explain it. So generally that's 2 theories or 2 concepts from 2 different topics used to explain the behaviour that's happening in the scenario. Both of these are at the back of the paper, and as I always say to you in class, when you first get into your exam, open the paper, go to the back and read the 2 9 markers. If you like them, answer them. If you don't like them, go back to the start, and then you can complete them with whatever time you have left at the end. On your screen you can see the theories and concepts that you need to know for development. So starting right at the start of the topic is early brain structure. So this is the forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain, medulla and cerebellum. So you need to know the roles of each one and when they start to appear within a child's development. You've got Piaget's stages of development. So sensory-motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, formal operational. So what is a main characteristic of each stage? And an example of that being used in real life, mainly education, and obviously we need to know strengths and weaknesses of that theory as well. You've got Piaget's development of intelligence. You may recognise this as schema theory. So assimilation, obviously making the schema working, so you have equilibrium. Disequilibrium happens because of a new situation, and then accommodation is using that schema to get through that situation before you assimilate and make a new schema again. So you need to know that flowchart from start to finish. Then we move on to direct mindset theory, one that you will know quite well. So a growth and fixed mindset. So 2 or 3 characteristics of each. Remember, they're the opposite of each other, so that should help reduce down your knowledge and knowing the strengths and weaknesses of the theory. We've got Willingham's learning theory. This is one that people can try to remember too much of. Just remember it's physical, social and cognitive are the areas of development, and you need to know at least 1 strategy to improve the development of each one. For all of those theories, you must know at least 1 strength or weakness. So that's for Piaget's stage of development, direct mindset theory and Willingham's learning theory. Each needs at least 1 strength and 1 weakness. If you could learn 2 of each, that will definitely help your knowledge within the exam. The issue and debate for development is moral development, and the theory you'll be using for this is Kohlberg's theory of moral development. So you've got pre-conventional moralities, that your morals come from your parents. It's about following rules and right and wrong. Conventional morality is that morals come from people around you, and it's about fitting in and being a good member of society. And post-conventional morality is that you believe that morals are above the law. You can break the law if you think it's morally right to do so, and therefore your morals are based on your own opinions. The research that backs this up is Heinz's dilemma. So in terms of being able to work out what stage people are in, that hypothetical situation about would you steal the drug or not, but obviously it was only tested on men. So we know that's an issue when it comes to generalising it to the whole population. There are 2 studies for the topic of development. So you've got Piaget and Haldor's 3 mountains task. Remember, they were given 3 tasks to the children, had to build the mountains from their point of view, had to place the doll in the position of the picture, and pick a picture that showed the doll's point of view. It supported Piaget's stage of development. However, we know that there are question marks around was the task too difficult for younger children, and because it's a lab experiment, it doesn't have much applicability to real life. Secondly, we have Gunderson et al., which is a parent-prey study, where they use data from a previous study, so it's double-blind, which means it's going to be reliable because it won't change their behaviour, but it opens up questions around ethics. And they found that the more process praise a child gets, the more likely they are to have a growth mindset. However, person praise does not cause a fixed mindset. It made no difference. So the main points here in terms of your evaluation are the fact it is done in a real-life environment and it is double-blind. On your screen, you can see the theories for the topic of memory. So starting with Atkinson and Shrimplin's multi-store model of memory. This is the flowchart of memory that a lot of you will be able to remember. Remember, you do not have to draw it out from scratch, but you need to be able to label and identify each part. So looking at sensory memory, if we pay attention, goes into our short-term memory. Short-term memory, if we encode it through rehearsal, it goes into our long-term memory, and information is retrieved back into your short-term memory. Short-term memory lasts 18 seconds and can hold 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information, whereas long-term memory has an unlimited duration and capacity. Information processing uses a lot of the same words in terms of encoding, short-term memory, long-term memory. However, it focuses on the computer model being input, process and output, rather than being the full flowchart that Atkinson and Shrimpling created. Bartlett's theory of reconstructive memory. This is all around how our memories are not accurate and they are changed, so they're active reconstructions, and it's our schemas filling the gaps in our memories when we recall a story. So they looked at what Bartlett stated, that our memory changes in 4 ways. So omission is leaving out information, transformation is changing it, so you must know those 2 words. The 2 types of transformations are rationalization, so adding in information to give reason for what's happening, and familiarization is changing the story to make it suit your schema. There are 2 types of amnesia you need to know. Retrograde amnesia is losing your old memories, and anterograde amnesia is not going to make new memories. Remember, for both of those definitions, you must have from the onset of amnesia in your answer. So retrograde amnesia, the full definition, is not being able to remember memories from before the onset of amnesia, and anterograde amnesia is not being able to make new memories after the onset of amnesia. For the multi-store model of memory, information processing and reconstructed memory, you need to know strengths and weaknesses of each and the research that supports the theories from later on in the topic. The issue and debate for memory is reductionism versus holism. So reductionism is breaking down behaviour to explain it using its basic constituent parts. So you'd focus on one area at a time and then you would study that. So for example, in memory, if you want to look at why we remember, you would focus just on rehearsal and rehearsal only, like Peterson did in their study. That is a reductionist approach. Holism is the opposite end, so that is trying to explain the behaviour as a whole, knowing that the whole is greater than the sum of its constituent parts. So if we wanted to look at memory, we wouldn't just look at rehearsal, we'd look at all the different factors that make up memory to be able to study it in more detail. Reductionism is good because it is scientific, it's testable, however, it will ignore other factors. Holism is the other way around. So it's hard to test because it's hard to test all the variables at once. However, because it's qualitative methods, it gives us a greater detail and greater understanding of behaviour. The 2 studies for memory are Bartlett's War of the Ghosts. So this is when a story was given to a group of people. It was the War of the Ghost story, so it's an unfamiliar story with lots of specific details in it. There is repeated reproduction, whereas the same person repeated it over different time periods. There's no set intervals for time, but it could have been 1 month, 3 months, up to a year. But each participant recorded at different time intervals, which is an issue when it comes to reliability and the ability to compare the results. Then you had serial reproduction, is when one person passed on to another, who passed on to another, who passed on to another. In both situations, people left out information, so omissions happened, and there's lots of transformations, for example, a canoe becoming a boat. So therefore, in terms of evaluation, it supports, we can use it to support the theory of reconstructive memory. In terms of evaluation of the study, it lacks that scientific nature because it didn't have set time intervals, didn't have a standardized procedure, but it was a real life task of passing a story from person to person. Peterson did the trigram study, so have to count back in threes or fours from a set number whilst recording the trigram at either 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 or 18 seconds. They found that after 3 seconds, 80% remember the trigram. However, after 18, this dropped down to only about 10%. It is a lab experiment, so it's very standardized, very high levels of control, so very reliable. However, the task lacks real life application, and there's only 24 students doing it, therefore it has a small sample size. Within psychological problems, obviously there's two halves, depression and addiction. I'll start by going through the depression side of the unit. So you need to know the diagnosis criteria, so what are the symptoms of depression and what is the difference between moderate, mild and severe in terms of how many symptoms there are and how does it affect a person's life. Genetic explanation, looking at how do genes impact depression. So you come up with some examples of twin studies. You've also got Caspi et al. With a 5-HTT gene, which can explain why someone can be more likely to have depression based on their lifestyle. We've got the cognitive explanation, which is saying it's how your brain processes information that will cause you to have depression. Within that, you've got Ellis's ABC model, so activating event, beliefs and consequences. And you've also got Beck's cognitive triad, so negative view of self, negative view of future, negative view of the world. In terms of those explanations, you need to look at the strengths and weaknesses of them. So in terms of genetics, it's scientific, it's testable, but it will not take into account the cognitive explanation, so it will ignore some factors. Cognitive explanation has that real life application, it takes into account the event, it links to treatment, so lots of real positives about it. However, it ignores the roles of genetics and cannot explain all cases. When we move on to therapies, we've got cognitive behavioural therapy. Remember, this is the same process whenever you do CBT throughout the course. So it's about that functional analysis, which is finding out about the patient, what are their symptoms, what are their causes, getting that background information. Skills training, so within skills training for depression, it's going to be changing those irrational thoughts, changing them to be more logical, working on that positive thinking, and then homework is going to be setting them tasks that they can do in their day-to-day life where they have to go and apply those skills. And that process will repeat generally over a 12-week period with building on the work they've done in the previous session and set themselves targets for the next session. Drug therapy for depression. Generally, we're mainly focused on SSRIs, so selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that blocks serotonin being reabsorbed in the synapse, meaning it must pass on and therefore must make someone feel happier. You've got SNRIs, which is selective serotonin and noradrenaline reuptake inhibitors, which is the same job but for serotonin and noradrenaline as well. The study for depression is Caspi et al., which focused on that gene we spoke about earlier and found that if you have the specific gene and you have a stressful life event, you're more likely to have depression. That's if you have one short version. If you have two short versions of the gene, you are then more likely to have severe depression. So that is all the information for depression. It's about making sure you know specific examples and numbers for each to be able to back up each of the theories with evidence, and also think about the evaluation side of it, what might be the weaknesses as we go through. Within the addiction half of the topic, you need to know the two different types of addiction. So behavioural addiction, which is about doing an action, such as gambling, for example, or a substance addiction. So, for example, nicotine would be the substance within cigarettes. You need to know the symptoms of each, and so some symptoms will be the same for both types of addiction, some will be the same for just one type of addiction. When it comes to genetic explanation, you need to look at some twin studies, so give some examples of twin study statistics, any adoption studies as well that show evidence that there is a genetic link between addiction and family members. The evaluation point for genetic explanation will be the same as it is for depression, so scientific, testable, however it ignores other factors. When it comes to learning theories, you need to know all three learning theories. So social learning theory, so learning through observation and imitation of others. You've got classical conditioning, which is learning through association, so pairing two items together, so when one happens it makes you want to do the other. And operant conditioning, which is learning through the consequences of your actions. So for example, if you're gambling and you win money, you're rewarded, you're more likely to do it again. The CBT process is exactly the same as depression, so functional analysis, what is the addiction, how bad is it, how long have they had it. Skills training is going to be slightly different though, because it's going to be giving them skills to say no, the ability to deal with withdrawal symptoms, and the ability to try to change their behaviour patterns based on those two skills. And then when we get to drug therapy, we're looking at how can things such as SSRIs be used within addiction as well as where they're normally used before. The study for addiction is young, so this is looking at online CBT for those who are addicted to the internet, and found that over 12 weeks it was effective, and 6 months later, yes, it wasn't as effective as it was after 12 weeks, but it was still effective from when it first started, showing that online therapy, and especially CBT, is an effective long-term treatment for those who have internet addictions. In terms of strengths of the study, obviously it is real-life application. They used quantitative measures, so therefore it could be reliable. However, the issue was it's only done on internet addictions, and they didn't look at any specific outcomes based on specific internet addictions, so it's hard to generalize to all types of addiction. The issue and debate for psychological problems is nature versus nurture. So this is going to draw on a lot of information you already know from the topic. So nature is that behaviour is caused by your genetic code or your DNA. Do not say it's behaviour from your parents, because that would not get you the mark in the exam. It has to be behaviour from your genetics. So therefore we're going to look at the genetic explanation for both. So looking at twin studies, adoption studies, to say that, give examples of where the behaviour can come from. So it's scientific, it's testable, however would ignore other factors. The nurture approach is behaviour that is learned from the environment around us. So we're going to look at learning theories here, so social, classical and operant, to see how they can explain the behaviour, and again using the evaluation points you've got from there. So real life application, it can explain lots of reasons why addiction can happen. However, it ignores other factors such as genetics and the cognitive explanation. So if you're writing an answer on this one, it's about using the knowledge you already have rather than having to remember anything extra, and make sure you use those really clear, specific bits of evidence to support your point. On the screen, you can see the topics for the brain and neuropsychology topic. So brain structure is the different parts of the brain, knowing that the frontal lobe does impulse control and decision making, your parietal lobe does perception and understanding the world around us, the temporal lobe does understanding and processing speech, the occipital lobe is about processing and understanding visual information, and your cerebellum is managing motor commands. The nervous system, we've got the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is the outer limbs, so arms and legs going to your fingers and your toes, and how messages are sent between them and the brain to control your body. Synaptic transmission, you need to know the process from start to finish, knowing that the neurotransmitter starts on the axon, moves down the axon to the terminal button, gets released into the synapse, where it then gets absorbed into the next neuron, and the impact that they can have on us. So for example, serotonin making us feel happy. Brain lateralization is the fact we have a left and a right brain that is joined by your corpus callosum, and actually the gender differences in how our brain works. So if you think about the letter L, left brain does language and logic. So that is the female side, so L for left, L for ladies. So that's one gender difference there. Males are less likely to, as a population, have one specific dominance in left or right, but at an individual level, they will still have a more dominant side of the brain. The right side of the brain is about spatial awareness, and it's about creativity and skills associated with those kind of demands. Types of agnosia, we've got prosopagnosia, often referred to as face blindness, but the definition of prosopagnosia is the inability to recognize faces, and we've got visual agnosia, which is the inability to recognize objects just through sight. So therefore, someone has to use touch or smell to identify the objects in their environment. The issue and debate for brain neuropsychology is psychology over time. So this is about the changes in the study of psychology and the method used. So looking over time, it generally reflects society. So looking at understanding where behaviour comes from, then following on from the war, understanding mental health conditions and the impact that our thinking can have on us. So looking at things such as depression or PTSD, and now modern study looking at things such as gender and understanding the behaviours that link to society. The methods that have changed is a real big part of this. So looking at EEG, so electroencephalograph, the first ability to kind of measure the brain activity while someone's alive, whereas before we'd have to wait for someone to die to look at their brain. Think about the Phineas Gage study we'll talk about later on. Then you've got MRI scan, so magnetic resonance imagery, so be able to see again in a picture form the activity of the brain, and a PET scan, so positron emission tomography, these modern technologies that allow us to see the brain activity in much more detail. When you're talking about this topic, you can refer to the studies within it, so in terms of Phineas Gage, how modern technology would have made being able to study the brain whilst it was alive, and even when talking about Sperry, instead of having to just measure what the person could do, they could have had their brain connected to a machine to actually measure the activity in each half, rather than just looking at what the participant could say. The two studies for brain neuropsychology are Sperry split brain. So this is the participants who had their brain split after surgery, when image was presented to one eye and they had to complete a task based on either saying it or drawing it. So if an image was placed into their left eye, it went to their right brain, therefore they could not say it, but they could draw it with their left hand. If an image was presented to their right eye, it would go to their left brain, therefore they could say it, but they could not draw it with their left hand. The task was repeated with feeling images, so if it was felt in the left hand, they could not say it, but they could find it again with their left hand. If it was felt in the right hand, they would be able to say what they were feeling. In terms of evaluation of that, so it's a lab experiment, so it's a high level control, very scientific, very reliable, however, only had 11 participants, so it's a very small sample size. And our next study is Damasio, so that's looking at Phineas Gage, so a case study here, so we know it's only one participant, but we know it's going to have lots of detail to it. Was injured, damaged his frontal cortex, became more impulsive, more aggressive, and struggled to control his emotions, therefore supporting the role of the frontal cortex in behaviour. And so those evaluations are all about the case study. So it's about that it was only on one person, which is obviously going to be hard to generalise. It was also based on the behaviours changed based on stories that could have changed over time. But it gave us a real life example of what can happen when the brain is damaged. On your screen are the different topics for social influence. So for each of these, you need to define what they are and also know different factors impacting it. So conformity is changing your behaviour to match the group around you, because you don't know how to behave or you want to fit in. And you need to be able to talk about the different factors affecting conformity, such as size of majority, unanimity of the majority, locus of control, and about how they impact the behaviour. Bystander behaviour is, you've got bystander apathy, is when someone does not intervene or offer help, and bystander intervention is when someone does intervene and offer help. So for these, you need to know that both the personal and situational factors affecting that decision. So looking at things such as cost of helping, pluralistic ignorance, mood. There are many factors that you can talk about within those areas. Obedience, now this is a theory, but taking a lot of the findings from Milgram's study to explain it. So obedience is following the orders of an authority figure, and when we're looking at factors that affect it, such as the conditions that were in Milgram's study, in terms of help of others, legitimacy of the context, the image of the authority figure, you can take those from Milgram and apply them to real life as well. Within crowd behaviour, we have pro-social and anti-social behaviour. So pro-social behaviour is looking at good behaviour that's taken from the crowd, and anti-social behaviour is negative behaviour that has a negative impact on society. That anti-social behaviour is often caused by de-individuation, which is losing your identity due to being part of a group. So if someone doesn't feel they're identifiable, they'll take on the behaviour of the group and quite often lead to poor behaviour being shown. Blind obedience is following the behaviour of an authority figure without question, which is a real issue within society. And when we looked at you look at past events such as the Holocaust, blind obedience happened a lot, and you need to look at how we can prevent it through factors such as education, familiarity with the situation, about to explain the ways of preventing blind obedience. The issue and debate for social influence is social cultural issues. So when we're talking about culture, we're looking at collectivist and individualistic culture. So collectivist is a culture which emphasizes group interactions, and a kind of whole element of this society, of this culture, is the fact that it's about being part of the group, knowing that the group can achieve more together. Individualistic cultures emphasize independence and standing out from the crowd, to try to make yourself be successful rather than focusing on the group. When we're talking about these, you can refer to Ash and Milgram. You found that actually Milgram found that there is less obedience in an individualistic culture, and Ash found, and when people repeated Ash's study, it was found that there was more conforming within a collectivist culture. Social issues is taking the terms conformity, bystander, obedience, and applying them to real life events. Applying to things like riots, that could be the London riots of 2010, it could be the more recent riots we've seen in England. It could also be applying to examples like the Holocaust, so that you can show how each of those terms impacts societal events that have happened over history. The two studies for social influence are Haney, Banks and Zavado, the prison study, so where they got a simulated prison at Stanford University. Participants were placed in the prison or were randomly selected to be either prisoners or guards, and they were filmed and watched to see how and what events happened. It was believed it was going to be a really boring study, and it was set to last 2 weeks, however had to be cancelled after 6 days because of the abuse and the mental impact it's having on the prisoners in particular. It showed massive conformity to social roles, and it made people aware of the harm that individuals can cause to each other. So the strengths of the study are the fact that it was a very controlled environment, and everything was recorded to be able to see what was going on. The prisoners and guards were selected based on not having any prior mental health conditions. However, the main weaknesses of this were the fact that it was massively harmful to participants. Some participants said they guessed the aim, some said they did not, or they changed their behaviour. So you've got issues around demand characteristics as well. The second study is Piliavin, which is the underground train study, where on the New York subway, someone would collapse and they would see who helped. They found that males were more likely to be the first person to help. They found that there was a tendency for same race helping, and they found that a sober person was more likely to get help than a drunk person. In terms of strengths of the study, it's a real life environment, so very high levels of applicability or ecological validity. However, weaknesses are you could talk about ethics, so they didn't ask consent from the people around them to be part of the study, and the situation was very specific to a train, therefore it may not be applicable to other real life situations. There are 3 types of questions that you need to know how to answer in terms of exam technique. So firstly, we have got a trigger question. This is where you have to define the key term and then apply it to the scenario. So if it was asking you about mindset theory, you'd say a growth mindset is, and then you'd tell me exactly what the definition of growth mindset is, and then you say this links to the scenario because, and you say how that information is seen within the scenario. So taking keywords, phrases, the person's name, and saying what behaviour they show that shows the definition happening. If it's a study, in your first sentence you would put the results of the study, and in the second sentence you'd say how those results are seen in the scenario. When answering an evaluation question, you have to give a really clear piece of evidence first. So no generic statements, it has to be specific. So if you were talking about Sperry, you'd have to say one weakness of Sperry is that only had 11 participants. So make sure you put exact numbers and be incredibly specific with that evaluation point. Don't be generic by saying it just had a small sample size. Make sure you say the exact number or the exact piece of evidence. Then you say this is a weakness because, and you would say why that's a weakness, ideally linking to either generalizability, reliability, applicability, validity, ethics, and quite often sample size comes up, and making sure you then say why that's a weakness. So if you're using the example of Sperry only having 11 participants, this is a weakness because sample size is too small, meaning you're not able to generalize it to, and then talk about the people in the scenario and why not be able to generalize it would be a weakness. When we are doing conclusion questions, so this is going to be, there's going to be a scenario with some kind of data in it, you have to make a clear statement if it is fact. So you say one conclusion is, and then make sure it's a statement. Do not just describe the results, make sure it is a clear statement. Once you've made your clear statement, you're then going to use the data to say, I know this because, and then use that data. So if we took an example of a study where people who are 6 foot had size 12 feet, and people who are 5 foot had size 4 feet, I would say the taller you are, the bigger your feet. That's my statement, and I say I know this because those are people who average 6 feet had size 11 feet, those who averaged 5 feet had size 4 feet. So I've got my clear statement first, and I've got my data to back it up after. When answering a 9-mark question, it's really important to follow the idea structure. So your first paragraph is going to be your identify paragraph. So you're going to identify all those key terms, all the theories, and you're going to put all your definitions and knowledge within this paragraph. So it's identifying what you know in terms of definitions and key terms. So 3 marks for that one in your issues and debates. So telling what the issue and debate is. Describe it, and how is that in the scenario? So if it's moral development, how is moral development seen in the scenario? If it's psychology over time, how does the scenario show psychology change over time, etc. The explain is explaining strengths and weaknesses and the research that supports it. So the first part of this paragraph is there research that supports it? So if you're doing nature versus nurture, what studies support nature, what studies support nurture? If there are any other strengths and weaknesses, that can go in this paragraph as well. And your conclusion is your analyse, so making sure you conclude. So if it is nature versus nurture, what one is more responsible for behaviour in the scenario? If it's psychology over time, summarise how psychology over time has impacted that scenario. So I would say write the word idea at the top of your page, and as you do each paragraph, make sure you cross them off. For your issues and debates question, it is worth 3 marks for the I, the D and the E, and you'll analyse your conclusion, just gives you that quality of written communication. If it's the 2 areas paragraph, I would always say do I, D and E for area 1, I, D, E for area 2, and then your conclusion comes at the end. Do not write too much for this paragraph. The 2-mark areas for each paragraph. Remember, each paragraph is only worth 1 or 2 marks for the 2 areas, opposed to 3 marks for the issues and debates one. So make sure you are a bit balanced in your answer there. Make sure you cover both sides, but you don't have to write 2 9-markers. Just make each paragraph half as long. Key thing here, do not forget the first paragraph. So many times people do not put their knowledge down in that I paragraph and they miss out on marks. So make sure you do start with that knowledge and you can get a really good head start on your answer. Now, if you're looking for some final revision or some final tips for the exam that you'll be sitting, remember all the information is on the revision PowerPoint. It's on the student drive, it's been uploaded to Arbor, so you'll find all the key points you need to know. There are also the evaluation points, there are the exam questions and the mark scheme. So if you are not sure on information, you can check your knowledge by reading the slides. You can have a go at answering questions and you can then use the mark schemes. Remember, the mark schemes are only example answers. There are many other answers you can put down. That's why it says accept any other appropriate response. Just because you don't write what's on a mark scheme doesn't mean you won't get marks. You can always go back and check the knowledge slides to see if you think your answer will be worthy of a mark based on the other information that's around. In terms of all your evaluation points, make sure you know at least 1 strength and weakness for all the areas, all the theories that need evaluation. If you could know 2, that's great, but remember some of them you should be able to know through your skills. So if it's a lab experiment, we know the strengths and weaknesses of lab experiments, for example. If it's in development, a lot of the points are applicable to education. Make sure you're specific with how they can be applied to education, but the evaluation point can be the same across a lot of them. So try to make sure you make links between the evaluation points to help reduce down the amount that you need. What's really important is it's very hard to finish paper 1 at a time, so do not rush the exam. As I said before, go to the back first, read the 9 markers. If you like them, answer them. If not, complete the rest of the paper and use whatever time is left at the end to complete them. If you feel like you're running out of time, please don't feel you need to rush questions. You're better off doing 80% of the paper really well because you've taken your time than 100% rushed. Okay, so please make sure you are, if you don't answer it all, that's fine. We can work on getting quicker over time, but just really focus on making sure that you're answering the question with the best quality that you can. And before every question, you take a pause, you think, what type of question is it? And then you answer it correctly. But if there's any final revision you need to do, the revision PowerPoint is the main point to go, or obviously contact your teacher.